I was sitting alone in my small apartment when the phone rang. My ex-wife's elderly neighbor lowered his voice and said, "Someone measured the house today. I think your son is quietly trying to sell it, and his mother may not even know." 4 years after the divorce, I drove back to the place that used to be home and found hallway cameras covered with black tape legal papers spread across the kitchen table. Then the housekeeper slipped a prescription bottle into my hand and whispered, trembling, "She's not losing her mind. They're making her look that way." If you found your way here today, thank you more than you know. Tell me in the comments, where in the world are you watching from, your city, your corner of the map? One thing worth mentioning: certain elements of this story were crafted for storytelling and educational value. Names and settings are not drawn from any specific person or place, but the lesson at the heart of it absolutely is. I used to think silence was a form of respect. For 4 years, I told myself that. Every morning when I woke up in this apartment, 1,200 square feet of beige walls and secondhand furniture, I told myself that staying away was the right thing to do. That Vivian needed space, that she had made her choice and I had made mine. I told myself a lot of things in 4 years. 4D. It was a Monday night in October when the phone rang. I was sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of tea I hadn't touched, watching the steam curl up and disappear into nothing. The ring cut through the quiet like a blade. The number was local, an old neighbor. "Cormac," I said. Cormac Wills, 74 years old, retired postal worker. The kind of man who noticed everything and forgot nothing, cleared his throat on the other end of the line. When a man like Cormac clears his throat before speaking, it means whatever comes next is going to cost you something. "Eldon," he said, and his voice had that careful, low quality of a person choosing every word. "I don't know if I should be calling. I went back and forth on it all day. But if it were my Margaret, I'd want someone to call me." My hand tightened around the phone. What happened? "There was a man at Vivian's house this afternoon. Younger guy, nice car, carrying one of those big leather folders. He walked the perimeter of the property with a measuring tape." Cormac paused. "Eldon, I know what a realtor looks like when they're sizing up a listing." The tea in front of me had gone cold. I hadn't noticed. "Did you talk to Vivian?" I asked. "I tried. I knocked on the door and Preston answered, that son of hers, the older one. He said his mother was resting and couldn't have visitors." Another pause. "But here's the thing, Eldon. I've lived next to that woman for 18 years. She's never not once turned me away at the door. Not even when she had the flu. Not even the week after you two—" He stopped himself. "I just thought you should know." I set the phone down on the table for a moment. Not because I needed to think I had already decided the second he mentioned the measuring tape. I set it down because my hand had started to shake and I didn't want him to hear it in my voice. I picked it back up. "Cormac, I need you to do something for me. Don't mention this call to anyone." "Already forgotten," he said, and I believed him. After I hung up, I sat there for exactly 2 minutes. I know, because I watched the clock on the microwave tick from 10:07 to 10:09. Then I looked down at my left hand. I had been wearing my wedding ring for 34 years. When Vivian and I signed the divorce papers 4 years ago, I didn't take it off. I just turned it around so the engraving faced my palm instead of the world. I told myself it was habit. I told myself I just hadn't gotten around to removing it. But the truth I had never said out loud was that I couldn't. I had sent her 11 letters in 4 years. 11. The first one was 3 weeks after the divorce was finalized. I wrote it by hand, sitting at this same table, and I told her things I never said out loud when we were married. That I was sorry. That I had failed her in ways I only understood after she was gone. That if she ever wanted to talk, not to reconcile, not to relitigate the past, just to talk, I was here. She never wrote back. None of them ever wrote back. I had spent 4 years telling myself that her silence was an answer. That she had moved forward and I needed to do the same. But a man doesn't send a realtor to measure a house when the owner is in her right mind and hasn't agreed to sell. And Vivian Hargrove loved that house more than she loved most people. I stood up, grabbed my keys from the hook by the door, and pulled on my jacket. The apartment was on the 3rd floor. As I walked down the stairwell, each step echoed in the concrete shaft, and I thought about the last time I had stood in front of that house. 4 years ago, a Tuesday afternoon in November. I had carried one suitcase to my car, and I had not looked back because I knew if I did, I would not leave. I had made a mistake that day. I was not going to make another one tonight. Outside, the October air hit me like cold water, sharp and immediate. The smell of dried leaves and someone's fireplace 2 blocks over. I unlocked my car, a 10-year-old Buick that Preston would have called embarrassing, and I sat behind the wheel for just a moment. I didn't know what I would find when I got there. I didn't know what Preston had been telling his mother or why a realtor was walking the property of a woman who, last I heard, wasn't well enough to manage her own calendar. But I knew Vivian. I had known her for 41 years. And something in Cormac's voice, that careful, weighted hesitation, had lodged itself in my chest like a splinter. Vivian would never agree to sell that house. Not unless she didn't know she was agreeing. I started the engine. I had driven past the old house exactly once in 4 years a Sunday afternoon, about 18 months after the divorce, when I took a wrong turn coming back from the hardware store and ended up on Dunmore Street without meaning to. I didn't stop. I barely slowed down. I just caught a glimpse of the front porch through the passenger window and kept driving my knuckles white on the steering wheel. My jaw clenched so tight my back teeth ached for 2 days afterward. This time I stopped. I pulled the Buick to the curb across the street and cut the engine, and for a long moment I just sat there looking at the house. The lights were on, the warm yellow kind that used to mean Vivian was still up reading or baking something she would pretend was for the neighbors but never actually give away. The maple tree in the front yard had grown. The porch swing was still there, though it sat at an angle that suggested one of the chains had been replaced with something that didn't quite match. 41 years of memories were packed into those walls, and I was sitting across the street like a stranger. I got out of the car before I could talk myself into going home. The front walk was the same Riverstone path Vivian and I had laid ourselves the summer of 1989 on our hands and knees in the Georgia heat, arguing about spacing and laughing about it 3 hours later. My shoes made the same sound on those stones that they always had. A low, familiar knock like a greeting. I raised my hand to ring the bell and the door opened before I touched it. Preston Hargrove filled the doorway. He was 42 years old, broad-shouldered, wearing a pressed white dress shirt with the sleeves rolled to the elbows and a watch on his wrist that probably cost more than my car. His hair was neat. His smile arrived immediately, smooth and perfectly calibrated, the smile of a man who had practiced it in the mirror until it no longer looked practiced. "Dad," he said, and stepped forward to grip my shoulder. "I didn't know you were coming. You should have called." "I was in the area," I said. "I heard your mother hasn't been well." "She's so much better, actually. We've really got everything under control." He kept his hand on my shoulder, steering me gently, almost imperceptibly, to the left, away from the hallway that led toward the bedrooms. Come in, come in. You hungry? I think there's something left from dinner." He talked the entire way to the kitchen, about the new care schedule they'd set up for Vivian, about some renovation he was planning for the back porch, about traffic on the I-285. The words came fast and smooth, and I recognized the technique I had used it myself once long ago in claims meetings when I needed to keep someone from asking a question I wasn't ready to answer. Keep them talking, keep them moving, never let them stop and look around. I looked around. The camera in the hallway corner, the one I had installed myself back in 2015 after Vivian's mother had a fall and we wanted to be able to check on the house remotely, had a strip of black electrical tape across its lens. Reed was standing in the doorway of the living room. He was 38, 4 inches shorter than his brother, with their mother's dark eyes and a way of holding his shoulders that had always reminded me of a man bracing for impact. He had been a sweet kid, the one who used to bring me coffee without being asked, the one who cried at the end of movies and pretended he had something in his eye. Looking at him now, I saw that sweetness still somewhere underneath, but it was buried under something heavy and exhausted. "Hey, Dad," he said. His voice was flat. He shook my hand the way you shake the hand of someone you owe money to. He didn't meet my eyes. "Reed." I held his handshake a half-second longer than necessary. "Good to see you, son." Something moved across his face, guilt or something adjacent to it, and then he stepped back into the living room and sat down on the couch with his phone. Preston was already pulling open the refrigerator. "You want coffee, beer? I think we've got—" "I'd like to see your mother," I said. Preston closed the refrigerator. His expression held, but something behind his eyes recalculated. A tightening around the eyes almost too quick to catch. "She's been asleep since 8, he said. "The doctor said rest is the most important thing right now. I'd hate to wake her." He spread his hands in a gesture of reasonable regret. "You know how she is when her sleep gets interrupted." He had placed himself, without appearing to do so, directly in the center of the doorway that led to the back hall. His posture was relaxed. His voice was warm, but his arm rested along the doorframe like a horizontal bar. "Of course," I said. "I'll see her in the morning." The relief on his face lasted exactly 1 second before he smoothed it back into hospitality. Great. I'll get the guest room set up. You'll stay with us. If that's all right, I said. Are you kidding? This is your... He stopped himself. Of course, stay as long as you want. I spent the next hour sitting in the kitchen while Preston talked, and I listened, and I drank a glass of water, and I cataloged everything I saw. The pill organizer on the counter, weekly dosage, all compartments full on a Monday, which meant someone had filled it recently, rather than letting Vivian manage her own schedule. The stack of manila folders on the kitchen desk with a rubber band around them set at an angle that suggested they had been moved there quickly from somewhere else. The way Reed never once came back into the kitchen for the rest of the evening. Around midnight, Preston showed me to the guest room and said goodnight with another one of those perfect smiles, and I told him I was grateful, and I waited until his footsteps reached the end of the hall. Then I sat on the edge of the bed in the dark, still wearing my jacket, turning my wedding ring slowly on my finger. Something was wrong in this house. I could feel it the way you feel weather coming, not yet visible, but already present in the air, in the pressure of things. I had just closed my eyes when I heard it. A soft knock at the door. 3 taps spaced like a code. I crossed the room and opened it. A woman stood in the dim hallway, small and straight-backed, with silver-streaked hair pulled away from her face, and eyes that held the particular exhaustion of someone who had been carrying a secret alone for too long. Dolores Vega had worked in this house for 16 years. She had outlasted 3 different kitchen renovations, 2 family dogs, and every argument Vivian and I had ever had within earshot of the laundry room. She was without question the most observant person in any room she occupied. She was holding a small prescription bottle in both hands. She looked at me for a long moment, not with relief exactly, but with the careful assessment of someone who needed to be certain before they opened a door that couldn't be closed again. Then she said very quietly, "I've been waiting 3 weeks for someone to call you." She stepped inside and pulled the door shut behind her without making a sound, the practiced quiet of someone who had learned to move through this house without being noticed. The kitchen was dim, only the light above the stove left on, and it cast everything in a low amber glow that made the whole room feel like the inside of an old photograph. Dolores set the prescription bottle on the table between us and took the chair across from mine. Her hands were folded, her back was straight, but her eyes dark and careful and rimmed with the kind of exhaustion that sleep doesn't fix told me she had been holding this moment together through sheer willpower for longer than anyone should have to. "How long?" I asked. 3 weeks since I was sure," she said. "Before that, I just thought I was imagining things. I'm 62 years old, Mr. Hargrove. I know how it feels to second-guess yourself when you're the help." She pushed the bottle toward me. I picked it up and turned it in the light. The label read Vivian Hargrove, prescribed by a Dr. Raymond Foss, a name I didn't recognize. The medication was listed as lorazepam, a benzodiazepine commonly used for anxiety. The prescribed dosage was 0.5 milligram once daily. "This bottle was filled 2 weeks ago," Dolores said. "It should have 30 pills in it. Count them." I opened the cap and shook the pills out onto my palm. 14. My stomach dropped. 16 pills gone in 2 weeks, I said. "That's more than 1 a day." "That's more than double the dose," Dolores said, and her voice cracked just slightly on the last word before she pulled it back under control. "And that's the bottle I found in the trash. The current bottle, the one Preston refills himself now, not from a pharmacy, Mr. Hargrove. He stopped letting me pick up the prescriptions 3 weeks ago. I don't know what's in it. I don't know the dosage. I don't know who prescribed it." The pill I was holding felt suddenly heavy in my palm, like it had a weight that had nothing to do with its size. "Tell me about the camera," I said. Dolores pressed her lips together, then nodded as if she had expected the question. "Every night between 9 and 11, the camera in the hallway goes dark. Not a malfunction, the light on the unit goes off completely, which means someone is cutting power to it manually, then restoring it after. I wrote down the dates." She reached into the pocket of her cardigan and placed a folded piece of paper on the table, neat handwriting in blue ink, 17 dates over the past 3 weeks, each one with a time the camera went offline and a time it came back on. Every single one corresponded to a night Preston had been in the house. "Every time he comes." Dolores continued, her voice dropping lower, though we were the only 2 people in the room. "The next morning, Mrs. Hargrove is worse. She can't finish sentences. She calls me by her mother's name. She asks what year it is." Her jaw tightened. "And then 2 days later, when he's been gone, she starts coming back. She'll ask me about the garden. She'll remember that she wanted to call her friend in Savannah. She'll be herself again." She leaned forward slightly. "That woman is not as sick as they're making her look, Mr. Hargrove. I have worked in this house for 16 years, and I know the difference between a woman who is declining and a woman who is being kept down. Something cold moved through my chest. "Has she ever said anything to you?" I asked. "Anything at all, even when she was confused?" Dolores hesitated. Then she reached up and touched the small gold cross she wore at her throat, a habit I remembered the thing she did when she was about to say something that cost her. "2 Sundays ago," she said slowly, "she had a good morning, real clear. She was sitting up in bed, and she asked me to bring her the blue notebook from the desk drawer. I brought it. She wrote something, tore out the page, folded it, and handed it to me." Dolores reached into her pocket again and placed a folded piece of notepaper beside the pill bottle. I unfolded it with hands that were steadier than I felt. 3 words in Vivienne's handwriting, still elegant, still precise, even through the tremor. "Find Eldon, please." My throat closed. I had to set the paper down. I pressed my thumb and forefinger against the bridge of my nose and breathed through it, the sting behind my eyes, the tightening in my chest that felt like grief and fury knotted together so tightly I couldn't separate them. 4 years. She had been sitting in that bedroom 10 miles from my apartment for 4 years, and I had been respecting her silence, and her silence had never been hers to give. "Why didn't you call sooner?" My voice came out rougher than I intended. Dolores met my gaze without flinching. "Because the last person who questioned Mr. Preston's decisions in this house was Mrs. Hargrove's home health aide from before. She raised concerns about the medication schedule to Preston directly. She was dismissed that same week. And I didn't have your number, Mr. Hargrove. I never needed it before. I spent 3 days trying to find it without asking anyone in this house. I didn't want Preston to know I was looking. I finally found an old Christmas card in the bottom of Mrs. Hargrove's address book with your apartment listed on the back. That was 5 days ago. I've been working up the nerve since then." She folded her hands on the table. "I have a grandson in college, Mr. Hargrove. I needed to be sure before I put this family's name against mine. I needed more than a feeling. There was nothing I could say to that. She was right. And the fact that she was right made me furious in ways that had nowhere to go at 1 in the morning. "There's one more thing," Dolores said, and something in her tone made me look up sharply. "Last week I came in early. Preston didn't know I was in the house yet. I was in the laundry room off the hall when I heard him on the phone in the kitchen." She took a slow breath. "He said, and I am telling you exactly what I heard, Reed's name is on everything. If this goes sideways, it goes sideways on him, not me." The room felt like it had tilted. Reed, his own brother. "Did he see you?" I asked. "No." "Does anyone else know you have this?" I gestured to the bottle, the paper, the list of dates. "No one," she said. "I have been carrying it in my cardigan pocket for 3 weeks. I didn't know who else to trust." She looked at me with those steady, exhausted eyes. "Mrs. Hargrove's mother. God rest her, she told me once, years before she passed. If my daughter ever needs help, find the person who loves her most. That person will know what to do." Her voice softened just slightly. "I always knew who that was, Mr. Hargrove, even when you weren't here." I folded the note and placed it carefully in my shirt pocket against my chest. Then I picked up the pill bottle and held it in my fist. "Dolores," I said, "I need you to keep doing exactly what you're doing. Don't change anything. Don't let Preston know you've spoken to me." I looked at her directly. "And I need you to understand, I'm not leaving this house until Vivienne is safe." Something shifted in her face then, not relief exactly, but the particular release of a person who has been holding a door shut against a strong wind and has finally been given someone to stand beside them. She nodded once. Then she stood, smoothed her cardigan, and walked back to her room without another word. I stayed at the kitchen table until the light outside the window shifted from black to the deep blue that comes just before dawn. I turned the pill bottle over in my hands and thought about 30 years reading insurance claims, 30 years of people hiding things in plain sight of fraud, dressed up as paperwork of harm, disguised as care. I knew what this was. And tomorrow morning I was going to become the most harmless, most confused, most agreeable old man Preston Hargrove had ever underestimated. By the time Preston came downstairs at 8 o'clock the next morning, I had already been awake for 2 hours. I had showered, made the coffee, and was sitting at the kitchen table with my reading glasses on and a mug in both hands, looking every bit like a retired old man with nowhere to be and nothing on his mind. 30 years as a claims adjuster had taught me one thing. Above everything else, the most dangerous person in any room is the one everyone has already decided isn't a threat. Preston walked in wearing another pressed shirt, navy blue this time, sleeves already rolled, phone already in hand. He glanced at me, then at the coffee pot, then back at me with that easy practice smile. "You're up early, Dad." "Old habit," I said pleasantly. "You want a cup? I made a full pot." He poured himself a mug and leaned against the counter, already scrolling through something on his phone. I watched him over the rim of my glasses. His jaw was working slightly, the micro-tension of a man running calculations behind a relaxed face. "Sleep okay?" he asked, not looking up. "Like a rock," I said. "This old house always did that to me." He set his phone face down on the counter, deliberate I noted, and turned to face me fully. "Actually, Dad, I'm glad you're here. There's some paperwork I've been meaning to go over. Trust-related stuff, estate planning. I know it's not the most fun conversation, but with Mom's health the way it is, we want everything organized." He moved to the kitchen desk and picked up the rubber-banded manila folders I had clocked the night before. "You mind taking a look, fresh set of eyes?" "Of course," I said warmly. "You know me, though I was always better with a wrench than a contract." I chuckled and shook my head. Vivian used to handle all the paperwork. I just signed where she pointed. The relief that crossed Preston's face was so fast most people would have missed it. I didn't miss it. He sat down across from me and spread the documents across the table with the smooth efficiency of someone who had rehearsed this moment. There were 3 stacks. The first was a trust amendment, a supplemental document modifying the existing family trust Vivian and I had established in 2019. The second was a durable power of attorney for healthcare. The third was a property management authorization. This first one, Preston began, his voice taking on the patient, explanatory tone of a man talking to someone he considers slow, just updates the trust to reflect Mom's current situation. Since she's not able to manage things as actively as before, it designates a co-trustee to handle day-to-day decisions. I peered at the document, squinting theatrically. "And that co-trustee would be you." "Reed and me jointly," he said smoothly. I turned a page and pretended to study it with great concentration while actually reading every word at normal speed. The amendment was written with careful layered language, the kind that sounds reasonable in a summary, but contains specific clauses buried in subsections that fundamentally alter the original intent. Subsection 4C in particular granted the co-trustees authority to liquidate trust assets in cases of, and here was the language, financial necessity as determined by the managing trustee. There was no definition of financial necessity. There was no independent oversight requirement. There was no threshold for what constituted an emergency. In plain terms, Preston could sell anything at any time for any reason he decided qualified as necessary. "This part here," I said, tapping the page with one finger and furrowing my brow in theatrical confusion. "This section 4, what does liquidate mean again? Is that like a bank thing?" Preston blinked. Then he leaned forward and explained it to me in the slow, simplified terms of a man who believed he was talking to someone incapable of understanding the original. He used words like simplify and streamline. He used the phrase just to make things easier for Mom. I nodded along and asked 3 more questions, each one slightly off target, each one allowing him to keep explaining, keep revealing, keep showing me exactly how the mechanism was designed to work. Then I picked up the second document, the healthcare power of attorney. In the state of Georgia, a healthcare power of attorney is a standard legal instrument that allows a designated person to make medical decisions on behalf of someone who cannot make them for themselves. It is a legitimate and commonly used document. What is not standard, what is in fact a known method of financial elder abuse, is embedding financial authorization language inside a healthcare directive. And that is exactly what I found on page 4. The clause was small, font size 8, tucked into a paragraph about related administrative decisions. It authorized the healthcare agent Preston to access, manage, and redirect financial accounts as necessary to fulfill the healthcare obligations outlined herein. There was no cap on the amount. There was no requirement for medical justification. There was no expiration. It was not a healthcare document. It was a financial takeover wearing a healthcare document as a costume. My hand resting flat on the table curled slowly into a fist beneath my palm where Preston couldn't see it. "This one's got a lot of pages," I said, holding it up with a mildly helpless expression. "Son, what's the main thing your mother would be signing here in plain English?" Preston leaned back in his chair. "Essentially, it just means that if Mom has a medical situation where she can't communicate her wishes, I can step in and make sure everything medical and otherwise gets handled properly, so she's taken care of and nothing falls through the cracks. Medical and otherwise." He had said it so naturally, so cleanly. "That makes sense," I said and nodded slowly. "You know, I just want to make sure your mother understands what she's signing. You know how she is. She likes to read everything 3 times. "Of course," Preston said. "We'll go through it together with her." His phone buzzed on the counter. He glanced at the screen and his expression shifted something sharper, more urgent, pulling at the edges of his composure. "Sorry, I need to take this." He stood and moved toward the hallway, lowering his voice. But my hearing has always been sharper than people assume. "Camille," he said, his wife. "I knew a woman I had met at holidays and never quite trusted. I told you it's under control. He doesn't understand the documents." A pause. "Yes," I said, "yes, before the end of the week." He ended the call and came back to the table, pulling the composure back around himself like a coat. "Everything okay?" I asked pleasantly. "Just a scheduling thing," he said. "Listen, Dad, there's also a piece of land, you probably remember it, the commercial lot on Pacific Avenue. Mom's been thinking about letting it go. The market's good right now, and—" Pacific Avenue. I set my mug down, let my face go soft and nostalgic. "Oh, that's the piece we bought in, gosh, it must have been 1993. Vivian used to talk about opening a little place there, coffee shop or maybe a diner." I smiled at the memory like a man who had no idea what was happening. "She still talk about that?" Something flickered behind Preston's eyes. Not guilt. Preston was not a man who carried guilt easily, but something like irritation at an obstacle he hadn't planned for. "She hasn't mentioned it in a while," he said carefully. "Huh," I said and picked my mug back up. "I'd want to ask her about that one before anything gets signed. You know how she loves that piece of land." Preston looked at me. The performance was still running, but something underneath it had gone very still. I told Preston I needed some air after breakfast, blamed it on my knee, said I always walked when the joints stiffened up, which was true enough. He nodded and told me lunch would be ready at noon, and I smiled and thanked him and walked out the front door with my hands in my jacket pockets and my pulse running faster than it should have been for a morning stroll. Cormac Wills lived 3 houses down on the left, a brick colonial with a vegetable garden along the south fence that he tended with the kind of obsessive precision most men reserved for classic cars. He was on the porch when I came up the walk, sitting in a green Adirondack chair with a newspaper folded in his lap and a mug of something steaming beside him. He was 74, broad through the chest, with a white mustache and the permanently watchful eyes of a man who had spent 30 years sorting other people's mail and knew more about this neighborhood than most people suspected. He saw me coming and stood up straight away. "I was wondering when you'd make it over," he said, and pushed open the screen door. "Get in here." His living room had the comfortable clutter of a man who lived alone and had stopped apologizing for it. Stacks of magazines, a lazy boy with a permanent indent, 3 different pairs of reading glasses on 3 different surfaces. He waved me toward the couch and went to the kitchen without asking, came back with a mug of black coffee and an envelope. He held the envelope out before he even sat down. "Found it 2 days ago," he said. "I was walking Butter, that's my dog she passed last spring. I still take the walk out of habit, and I saw it right there in front of Vivian's house. One of those real estate signs, the kind with the QR code staked into the front lawn like it had always belonged there. I scanned it because I couldn't believe what I was looking at. Then I drove to the library and printed it." I opened the envelope. Inside was a single printed page, a Zillow listing. The address was Vivian's house. The listing price was $1.4 million. The photos showed the interior, the living room, the kitchen, the backyard taken from angles and with a wide lens that only a professional photographer would use. Somebody had been inside that house with a camera and a contract. My hands tightened on the paper so hard the edges bent. "Eldon," Cormac said, carefully watching my face. "That listing went live 11 days ago. I checked the timestamp. 11 days ago. Vivian had been in that house sick and confused and being fed twice the recommended dose of a sedative while her son had already put her home on the open market." "There's a second page," Cormac said. I turned it over. The second page was a separate listing, smaller with fewer photos, but the address hit me like a fist to the sternum. Pacific Avenue. The commercial lot. The 1/4 acre of flat Georgia land that Vivian and I had scraped together $11,000 to buy in the winter of 1993, when we were still young enough to believe that someday we would have the time and the money to turn it into something. She used to keep a sketch of it, a hand-drawn floor plan on graph paper, little tables, a counter, a window seat along the east wall. She had drawn it on a slow Sunday afternoon and taped it to the inside of the kitchen cabinet where she kept the coffee mugs, so she would see it every morning. She called it the plan. Not a dream, a plan. Vivian never believed in dreams. She believed in plans. And now her son had put it on the internet for $280,000. I set the pages down on the coffee table very carefully because if I held them for another second, I was going to crush them. "You okay?" Cormac asked, leaning forward. His voice was gruff, but his eyes were concerned, the look of a man who had seen enough of life to know when someone needed a minute and when they didn't have one to spare. "No," I said honestly, "but I will be." I looked up at him. "Cormac, I need you to think carefully. Have you seen anyone at that house in the last few weeks who didn't look like family or medical? Someone who didn't fit?" Cormac sat back and rubbed his mustache, the thinking gesture. I remembered it from neighborhood association meetings years ago. "Yeah, actually," he said. "About 10 days back. SUV, blacked out windows, nice one, not a rental, parked in front of the house for maybe 20 minutes. Man got out, went inside. He was wearing a suit, but not a realtor suit, more like a," he searched for the word, "a debt suit, you know the kind where the suit is saying, 'I don't need to be friendly.'" Something shifted in my gut. "Did you see his face?" "Enough of it. 50s maybe, hard-looking. The kind of man who doesn't make small talk because he doesn't need anything from you." Cormac met my eyes. He wasn't there to buy a house, Eldon. Men like that only show up when someone owes them something. I thought about the trust amendment, the timeline, the urgency in Preston's voice when he'd said before the end of the week on the phone with Camille. Someone was pressing Preston, and Preston was pressing his mother. "Eldon," Cormac's voice had dropped. "What's going on in that house?" I looked at him, this man I had known for 18 years who had shoveled our walk in the ice storm of 2010 without being asked, who had brought Vivian soup every day for a week when she had pneumonia in 2017, who had printed a real estate listing at the public library because something felt wrong and he didn't know what else to do about it. "Something bad," I said, "and I'm going to stop it." I picked up the envelope and folded it into my jacket. "But I need you to do one thing for me. Name it. Don't talk to Preston. Don't let on you printed this. If he asks whether you've seen me, tell him we talked about the weather and your garden." I stood. "Can you do that?" Cormac stood too and looked at me with an expression that was half indignation, half respect. "Son," he said, "I delivered mail in this neighborhood for 28 years. I know how to keep my mouth shut." I believed him completely. Walking back to the house, I kept the envelope pressed against my ribs with my elbow and thought about Vivian's hand-drawn floor plan taped to the inside of the kitchen cabinet. I wondered if it was still there. I wondered if Preston had ever seen it. I wondered if he had and just hadn't cared. The October wind off the street had a bite to it, the kind that smells like the season turning over, like things dying in order to make room for whatever comes next. I walked back through the front door of that house wearing the same pleasant, empty expression I had worn all morning. But something had changed in the last 30 minutes. Something had locked into place behind my sternum like a bolt sliding home. This was no longer about protecting what was mine. Vivian had never stopped loving that land, and I was going to make sure nobody took it from her while I was still standing. The afternoon light had gone amber by the time I came back through the front door, that late October color that turns everything the shade of old photographs. The house was quiet in the way houses get when the people inside are all pretending not to be listening for each other. I was hanging my jacket in the hall closet when I heard the soft zip of a medical bag from the direction of the back bedroom, followed by the measured footsteps of someone who had learned to move through sick rooms without disturbing them. She came around the corner of the hallway and stopped when she saw me. Cecily Barrow was 58, Filipino-American with close-cropped silver hair and the kind of face that had spent decades noticing things other people missed. She was a private home care nurse 5 days a week for the past 6 weeks, I would later learn, and she carried herself with the particular self-possession of someone who had seen enough human suffering to be neither surprised nor hardened by it. She looked at me the way nurses look at you when they're deciding how much you can handle. "Mr. Hargrove," she said carefully, "Preston mentioned you'd arrived." "I'll bet he did," I said, keeping my voice easy. "Do you have a minute before you head out? I'd love to hear how Vivian's really doing." Something moved across her face, a quick internal calculation. Professional discretion weighed against something more urgent. She glanced toward the dining room where the muffled cadence of Preston's voice on the phone drifted faintly down the hall. 5 minutes, she said, and moved toward the kitchen. I followed her and pulled the door halfway closed behind us. She set her bag on the counter and turned to face me with her arms folded, not defensively, more like a woman bracing herself to say something she had been working up to for a while. "I want to be careful about what I say," she began. "I'm not a doctor. I can only tell you what I've observed." "That's all I'm asking for," I said. She took a breath. Mrs. Hargrove's baseline cognition fluctuates significantly depending on who is present and what time of day it is. That in itself isn't unusual with certain conditions. She paused. What is unusual is the pattern. On days Preston isn't here, she tracks time correctly, reads her mail, holds a full conversation without losing the thread. Last Thursday, she asked me for the crossword. She finished half of it and told me the other half was too easy to rush. Cecily's jaw tightened slightly. That is not a woman who is declining Mr. Hargrove. That is a woman being kept below her own waterline. I felt something loosen in my chest, relief and fury arriving at exactly the same moment. And on the days he is here, I asked. By evening, she's confused. She loses track of where she is. She called me by her sister's name twice last week. Cecily met my gaze directly. Mr. Hargrove, I've been doing this for 22 years. I know the difference between a patient whose condition is progressing and a patient whose condition is being managed in a particular direction. The words landed like stones dropping into still water. Has she said anything to you? I asked. Anything that stood out? Cecily reached up to adjust the strap of her bag, a small, fidgeting gesture from a woman who didn't fidget often. 2 weeks ago, she said, she had a very clear morning. I was helping her with her medication when she looked up at me and said, clear as anything. Cicely, if something happens to me, don't let them sell the land on Pacific. Eldon and I were going to build something there. She paused. Then Preston knocked and came in, and within 20 minutes she was asking me if her mother had called. My throat went tight. I pressed my thumb against the edge of the counter hard enough to feel the pressure in my knuckle. I need to ask you something directly, I said. Have you ever seen Reed act strangely around his mother, not Preston? Reed. Her expression shifted. Once, about 10 days ago. I came in earlier than usual, and when I opened the back door, Reed was standing in Mrs. Hargrove's room. He didn't hear me come in. He was standing at the foot of her bed with his phone in his hand, photographing the documents on her bedside table. She stopped. When he realized I was there, he put the phone in his pocket and walked out without a word. He looked like a man who had just done something he wasn't sure he should have done. My mind moved fast through the implications. Reed photographing documents, not to use them immediately, or he would have already. He was keeping copies. Insurance. The instinct of a man who doesn't fully trust the person he's working with. One more thing, Cecily said, her voice dropping into something quieter, something that had moved past professional and into simply human. Yesterday morning you were in the kitchen when I arrived. You didn't see me come in, but Mrs. Hargrove's door was open, and she was awake, and she was watching you through the doorway. Cecily's expression softened at the edges. She watched you for almost 5 minutes. You were just standing at the counter making coffee, and you didn't know she was watching. She cleared her throat. She had the most heartbroken and relieved expression I have ever seen on a patient's face, both at exactly the same time. The words punched straight through my ribs. I turned toward the window over the sink and looked out at the backyard the Japanese maple Vivian had planted the year Reed was born, the stone bench where she used to sit with her morning coffee. My eyes burned in a way I hadn't allowed myself to feel in 4 years, and I blinked against it hard, because this was not the time. Thank you, I said when I trusted my voice again. What you've told me matters more than you know. Cecily picked up her bag. At the kitchen door, she paused and looked back at me with the particular weight of someone who has watched too many families destroy themselves from the inside. Mr. Hargrove, she said quietly, whatever you're planning, don't wait too long. She's stronger than they think she is, but nobody stays strong forever. She left through the side door without saying goodbye to Preston. That night, I sat outside Vivian's door for the second night in a row. I didn't go in. Preston was still awake down the hall. I could see the strip of light under his door, hear the muffled cadence of his voice on yet another call. But I sat in the chair I had pulled from the guest room and placed in the hallway, and I listened to the sound of Vivian's breathing through the wall, slow and steady and still here. She had watched me make coffee and felt heartbroken and relieved at the same time. I understood exactly what that felt like. I had learned something important about Preston over the past 48 hours. He was very good at saying no to things that sounded unreasonable, but he had a blind spot for requests that came wrapped in the appearance of cooperation. So at breakfast Wednesday morning, I set down my coffee and said in my most worried father-in-law voice, Preston, I'd feel a lot better if I could take your mother in for a checkup today. Nothing big, just want to make sure everything's going the right direction. You know how I worry. I watched him run the calculation behind his eyes. Refusing would look suspicious. Agreeing meant appearing to be the attentive, cooperative son who welcomed outside medical input. Of course, he said warmly. Great idea, I'll come along. Oh, you've got that call with the broker at 10, I said as if I'd simply remembered. Don't cancel on my account, it's just a routine visit, I'll have her back by lunch. His jaw tightened by a fraction. Then he smiled. Sure, I'll call ahead and let Dr. Foss know you're... I've already made an appointment, I said pleasantly. With Dr. Sabine Merritt over on Peachtree. Vivian saw her years ago before everything. Figured a familiar face might be easier. That was a lie. I had called Dr. Merritt's office from the backyard at 6 that morning and explained the situation in enough detail that she had personally called me back within 20 minutes and cleared her 9:30 slot. Preston's smile stayed in place, but his coffee mug went down on the counter just slightly harder than necessary. Getting Vivian into the car was the moment I had been bracing for. She was sitting up in bed when Dolores and I came in, pale blue cardigan, silver hair brushed back, looking smaller than I remembered. Not thinner exactly, but diminished the way a candle looks when it's been burning in a draft. But her eyes, when they found mine, were clear. Clearer than they had been the night of my arrival. Eldon, she said, soft and careful, like something she'd been keeping in a safe place. How do you feel about getting out of this house for a couple of hours? I asked, keeping my voice steady. Hope flickered across her face, quick and unguarded, before she caught it. Preston won't like it, she said. Preston's on a call, I said. And you're allowed to go to a doctor's appointment, Vivian. You're not a prisoner. She flinched slightly at the word, then she nodded and let Dolores help her with her shoes. Dr. Sabine Merritt's office was on Peachtree Road, a family practice with a waiting room that smelled like vanilla and old magazines. Dr. Merritt herself was 55 tall, with the particular quality of attention that made you feel like the only person in the building. She had reviewed the background I'd given her office manager, and she did not waste time. While Dr. Merritt ran her assessment orientation questions, memory exercises, a standard cognitive evaluation, I stepped into the hallway and handed her nurse the prescription bottle Dolores had kept. 5 minutes later, Dr. Merritt came out and pulled the door behind her. She held the bottle and looked at me with an expression that was professionally controlled but had something very serious underneath it. Where did this come from? She asked. Her home, I said. Found in the trash, refilled outside the normal pharmacy. Dr. Merritt turned the bottle over. Lorazepam, 0.5 milligrams, prescribed by Raymond Foss. She said the name with a flatness that told me she knew it, and her opinion was not favorable. This bottle should have 30 pills. There are 14 left, and it was filled 2 weeks ago. Which means someone has been administering double the prescribed dose, she said, voice dropping to a precise quiet. Sustained over 2 to 3 weeks, the patient would experience significant cognitive impairment, confusion, memory lapses, disorientation. She would appear to be declining. She paused. But she is not declining. I just spent 15 minutes with your ex-wife and she is cognitively intact. Her recall is excellent. Her reasoning is clear. She correctly identified the current president, the year, the sitting Georgia governor, and the date of your wedding anniversary. Something unmistakably human shifted in her expression. She also told me without prompting that she believed her confusion was connected to her medication. The hallway felt very still. I'm adjusting her prescription today, Dr. Merritt continued. I'm also documenting everything, the bottle, the dosage discrepancy, my full clinical findings. Mr. Hargrove, what you are describing constitutes elder abuse under Georgia law, specifically OCGA Section 30-5-1. Administering medication to impair someone's judgment in order to obtain their signature on legal documents is a felony. The word landed in the air between us like a stone. That's why I need you to document everything, I said. Already started, she said. One more thing, I'd strongly recommend Mrs. Hargrove not return to that home environment until this has been formally investigated. Is there somewhere safe she can go? I'm working on that, I said. When we went back into the examination room, Vivian was sitting exactly as we had left her. But her color was better, and she was looking out the window with focused attention rather than the foggy half-presence I had seen in the house. She looked at the prescription bottle in Dr. Merritt's hand, and something moved across her face, not surprise, but the particular expression of a person whose worst suspicion has just been confirmed. It was the medication, she said, not a question. Yes, Dr. Merritt said gently. Vivian pressed her lips together hard. Her chin lifted. Her hands folded in her lap tightened until the knuckles went pale. She made a sound low in her throat, not a cry, something more controlled and more devastating than a cry. The sound of a woman absorbing a blow and refusing to go down. Then she looked at me. Get me out of that house, Eldon, she said. Her voice was steady and quiet and absolutely certain. Whatever you're planning, do it. On the ride back, Vivian looked out the passenger window at the Georgia oak trees passing by gold and rust in the October light. She was quiet the way strong people are quiet, not absence, but the gathering of something. When we pulled back onto Dunmore Street, she reached over and put her hand on top of mine on the gear shift. She didn't say anything. She didn't need to. But her grip was firm and warm and absolutely deliberate, and my heart battered as it was turned over in my chest like an engine catching after a very long winter. I dropped Vivian back at the house just before noon, told Preston the appointment had gone fine and the doctor said rest was important, and watched his shoulders drop approximately 1 centimeter with relief. Then I told him I had some errands to run and would be back before dinner. He didn't ask what errands. Men like Preston don't ask questions they might not want the answers to. Whitfield Crane's office was on Piedmont Avenue, a 2-story brick building that had been there since 1987 and looked like it intended to stay until the city itself gave out. The lobby smelled like wood polish and old paper, the particular smell of a place where serious things got done and nobody rushed. His assistant looked up when I came in and said simply, "He's expecting you. Go ahead back." Whitfield Crane was 64 long and angular, with reading glasses pushed up on his forehead and a legal pad already covered in notes. He had been the Hargrove family attorney since 1998, had drafted our wills, our trust, every major document Vivian and I had ever signed. He stood and shook my hand with both of his the way he did when something was serious. "Eldon," he said, "sit down. I've been going through everything since your call this morning." He flipped to the top page of his legal pad. "Let me start with the trust amendment Preston presented to you. The document was prepared by Aldridge and Voss, legitimate firm, but with a reputation for aggressive interpretation of fiduciary language." He tapped the first page. "3 things stand out when I compare it against the original trust I drafted in 2019. He held up one finger. "First, the original trust contains the undue influence protection clause. Any modification made while Vivian is receiving medical care requires independent legal counsel and a signed physician certification that she is deciding free from coercion." He looked at me over his glasses. "There is no such certification attached to this amendment. Preston was in violation of the trust's own internal safeguards before she ever touched a pen." I exhaled slowly. "Second," he continued, "look at subsection 6B on page 3. He slid the document across and pointed. "The subsection designated the co-trustee with authority to act on behalf of the trust if the primary truster was deemed, and here was the language, temporarily incapacitated as certified by the attending physician." The attending physician named was Dr. Raymond Foss, the same doctor who had prescribed the medication keeping Vivian confused. "Preston controls the doctor who certifies the incapacity," I said, my voice going flat, "and the incapacity is being manufactured by the medication." "A circular system of control," Whitfield said, his expression going very still, in the way of a man who has spent 40 years in law and still occasionally encounters something that genuinely disturbs him. "If proven criminal charges, Eldon, not just civil liability." "What about Reed's name on the documents?" I asked. Whitfield's mouth tightened. "Every document with meaningful financial exposure carries Reed's name as the executing party. Preston is listed as directing trustee in an advisory capacity only, which means he directs decisions but bears no personal liability if those decisions result in legal action." He set his pen down. "If this amendment had been executed and challenged, Reed would be the named defendant. Preston would be a witness." The air in the room felt like something pressing down. "He was going to feed his own brother to the system," I said. "That is the most straightforward interpretation of this document structure, yes." Whitfield folded his hands. "Now, there is something else I need to tell you. Something about the original trust." Something in his tone made me sit up straighter. He pulled a separate folder from the bottom of his stack. "When the divorce was finalized in 2020, standard protocol would have been to modify the trust to remove you as a beneficiary." He looked at me directly. "Vivian never requested that modification. She came in 3 months after the divorce and told me," he glanced at his notes, wanting to be exact, "leave Eldon's provision in. If something happens to me, he should be taken care of. He gave up everything. The least I can do is this." The room tilted. 15% of the total estate value," Whitfield said quietly, with a handwritten note filed alongside it that reads, "He spent 30 years making sure everyone else was taken care of. This is for him." Something broke open in my chest, not cleanly, not with any relief, but the way old wood breaks under pressure that has built too long. My eyes burned hot and sudden. I pressed my fist against my mouth and breathed hard through my nose until I had it back under control. 4 years believing she had moved on, that she had looked at what was left of us and decided it wasn't worth keeping, and the whole time she had been sitting in this chair making sure I was protected. "Preston found out," I said when I could speak again. "That would be my assumption," Whitfield said. "Which explains the urgency of the amendment. If he can get it executed before any legal challenge arises, that provision disappears. So does any claim you might make." I stood and walked to the window. Outside, Piedmont Avenue went about its afternoon business, the entirely ordinary machinery of a city that had no idea what was happening in a house on Dunmore Street. "Whitfield," I said without turning around, "I need a motion to freeze all trust assets pending investigation, based on the undue influence clause, the medication evidence, and Dr. Merritt's documentation." 48 hours, he said. "Make it 24. I turned back to face him. "And that provision Vivian made for me, I don't want it. When this is over, redirect it into a care trust for her. Independent trustee, no family access without court oversight." Whitfield looked at me for a long moment with an expression I couldn't entirely read. "Yes," he said. "I can do that." I picked up my jacket and headed for the door. My hand was on the handle when he spoke again. "Eldon," he said, "I owe you an apology. When you divorced, I assumed you had both moved on. I thought the silence was mutual." He paused. "I should have called." I looked back at him. "We all should have called," I said. And then I walked out into the afternoon with Vivian's handwritten words still somewhere in the back of my mind like a light left on in an empty room. He spent 30 years making sure everyone else was taken care of. This is for him, and the particular fury of a man who has finally understood the full shape of what was taken from him. The drive back from Whitfield's office took 20 minutes longer than it should have because I pulled into a gas station parking lot and sat there with the engine off watching the evening traffic move past without really seeing it. 15%. A handwritten note. He spent 30 years making sure everyone else was taken care of. This is for him. I had spent 4 years building a version of events in which Vivian had weighed our marriage against her pain and decided moving on was easier than trying again. I had folded myself around that story, worn it like a coat I didn't like but had convinced myself was necessary, and the whole time she had been sitting across town with our lawyer making sure I was protected. I started the car before I could spiral any further. The house was quieter than usual when I came in through the side door. Preston's makeshift office was dark, either gone out or gone to bed. Dolores had left a plate on the counter with my name on a post-it. I hadn't eaten since breakfast and couldn't taste anything anyway. It was Reed I noticed when I passed the back hallway. The rear door was ajar. Through the gap I could see the pale rectangle of porch light falling across the yard. I pushed it open quietly. Reed was sitting on the top step with his back to me, elbows on his knees, and unopened beer between his palms. Gray sweatshirt 2 sizes too big, old running shoes that had never been used for running. The posture of a man carrying something across his shoulders that had been there so long he had forgotten it wasn't supposed to be there. I had known that posture since he was 9 years old. I sat down beside him. He tensed, then let it out slowly when he registered who it was. "Didn't hear you come in," he said. "Didn't want to wake the house," I said. We sat in the kind of silence that exists between two people who have been careful around each other for so long that just sitting without performing anything feels like its own relief. Then Reed said without looking at me, "Dad, do you remember the blue bicycle, the Schwinn, when I was 9? "Blue and silver," I said. "You wrote it into the Hendersons' mailbox the first week you had it." A sound came out of him, half laugh, half something else. "Mom thought I'd stolen $40 from her wallet that week." "You swore you didn't take it," I said slowly. "I didn't." His voice went flat. "Preston did, and when Mom noticed he told her he'd seen me in her room." He cracked open the beer, took one sip, put it back down. "I was 9. I didn't know how to explain it. I just kept saying I didn't do it, and nobody believed me." Something cold moved through my gut. "That's how it always worked," he said, voice picking up a low-controlled heat that had been contained for years. Every time Preston needed a way out, he'd leave enough of a trail to point toward me. The missing petty cash in 2003, the dent in Mom's car in 2007. I grew up being the screw-up dad, the one who disappointed everyone, and more than half of it wasn't even mine. His voice cracked briefly before he dragged it back. "More than half of it wasn't mine. Why didn't you ever tell me?" I asked, my voice rough. Reed laughed short, sharp. You would have believed me over Preston. He was the one with the grades and the handshakes and the tie. I was the one who failed his driver's test twice. He shook his head. You loved me. I know you did, but Preston was the one you were proud of. The words hit somewhere soft and undefended. He wasn't wrong about that, not about my love, but about how I had let Preston's performance of competence blind me to what was happening beneath it. I was wrong, I said. Reed, I'm sorry. He turned to look at me, eyes wet but not spilling the look of someone who had waited a long time to hear something and wasn't sure how to receive it now that it had arrived. I got into this because I was drowning, he said quietly. The company failed. I owed $140,000. Preston came to me with a plan, a short-term draw from the trust, he called it, to be settled once the estate was reorganized. He said my name had to be on the paperwork as co-trustee because it would look cleaner. Reed's voice dropped. I told myself he was right. I needed to believe he was right. He pressed the heel of his hand against his eye. He said it like it was nothing, like we were just moving numbers. Not drugging your mother, I said quietly. Reed's whole body went rigid. The color drained from his face. I didn't know about the medication, he said fast and urgent. I knew about the documents, the trust. I told myself it was just paperwork. But the medication, I swear to God, I didn't know. He pressed both hands over his mouth, breathing hard. How bad is it? Bad enough that a doctor has filed official documentation. Reed dropped his head into his hands. His shoulders shook, not crying yet, but close, the trembling of someone fighting not to fall apart entirely. Last week I found an email, he said, voice muffled. A draft in Preston's sent folder. I wasn't snooping, I was printing something, and it was just open. It was addressed to a law firm I'd never heard of. He had to stop and steady himself. It said all financial transactions and trust modifications had been executed by Reed Hargrove, designated co-trustee acting as authorized agent. And at the very bottom, one line, client has been advised to maintain complete separation from all executing instruments. His voice broke. Stay clean. Put distance between yourself and every signature. Let Reed carry it all. He was shaking now hands, voice whole frame. He was going to hand me to them, Reed said. Walk away clean and hand me to them. Yes, I said. He was. Reed stared at the yard with tears tracking silently down his face while he breathed in shallow, controlled bursts, trying to hold himself together. I put my hand on his shoulder. Reed, I said, I need you to trust me. Not Preston. Me. He turned and looked at me. This son of mine who had spent his whole life being the one who got blamed, who had walked into this nightmare half because he was desperate and half because his brother had spent 40 years conditioning him to follow. And something shifted in his face. Some long-held tension finally and carefully beginning to release. What do you need? He asked. Before I tell you what I heard through that wall, and I promise you nothing could have prepared me for it, drop a number in the comments. Type 10 if you think Reed already knew everything, or type 1 if you think he was just as blind as I was. I need to know you're still here with me. One thing worth noting, some elements of this story have been shaped for narrative purposes and may not reflect every detail exactly as it occurred. If that changes how you want to experience it, this is a good place to step away, no hard feelings at all. I had been a claims adjuster for 30 years, which meant I had spent 3 decades learning to read the body language of people under pressure. Insurance fraud, disputed claims, contested liability. It all came down to watching what a person did with their hands, their eyes, their weight, when they thought the conversation was under control. I was at the kitchen window with my second cup of coffee on Thursday morning when the black SUV rolled to a stop in front of the house. Not a neighbor's car. Not a delivery. The way it parked 2 feet from the curb angled slightly. The way people park when they want to leave fast told me everything I needed to know before the door even opened. I had asked Whitfield 2 days earlier to run the plate on any vehicle matching Cormac's description. The name that came back was Ronan Sykes, a private lender operating out of a Buckhead office with no public-facing business, 3 civil judgments in the past 8 years, and a reputation Whitfield had summarized in exactly 4 words: do not owe him. The man who stepped out was somewhere in his mid-50s, built like someone who had once been athletic and had since replaced the muscle with something denser and colder. He wore a charcoal suit that fit too well to be off the rack, no tie, and he moved across the front walk with the particular economy of a man who never hurried because he had never needed to. No folder, no briefcase, no pleasantries waiting on his face. This was Ronan Sykes. I had not yet met him, But Cormac's description, the kind of man who doesn't make small talk because he doesn't need anything from you, had been precise. I stepped back from the window before he could see me and moved to the hallway where I could hear the front door without being visible. Preston had heard the car too. I could tell by the speed of his footsteps coming down the stairs 3 seconds faster than his usual measured descent. The rhythm of someone who has been waiting for an arrival they have been dreading. The front door opened. "Ronan!" Preston's voice was warm and controlled, but the warmth was a performance and not his best one. "I didn't know you were coming by." "I don't announce visits." Ronan's voice was low and even, the kind of voice that didn't need volume to land with weight. "You haven't been answering my calls." "I've been managing a family situation, my mother's health." "I know what you've been managing," Ronan said, and there was something in the way he said it that made the hair on my arms rise. "Can we go inside?" I moved quietly to the dining room doorway where the angle gave me a partial sightline to the living room. Preston had positioned himself near the armchair, not sitting, standing the pose of a man who wanted to appear in control of his own space. Ronan did not sit either. He stood in the center of the room like a man who owned every room he walked into and found the concept of invitation faintly amusing. "I need a number," Ronan said. "Not a conversation, a number and a date." "I'm close," Preston said. "The trust modification is almost finalized. Once my mother signs—" "Your mother hasn't signed anything in 3 weeks," Ronan said flatly. "My people have been watching the property records. Nothing has moved." He tilted his head slightly. "I gave you 60 days, Preston. $680,000 does not wait 61. You have 18 left." Preston ran a hand through his hair, the first unguarded gesture I had seen from him since I arrived. "I have a complication. My father showed up." "Your father." Ronan said it like he was tasting something. "The retired insurance man. He doesn't understand what's happening. He thinks he's just here to visit." Preston's voice tightened. "I just need him out of the house and I can close this in a week." Something hot moved through my chest, the particular fury of a man hearing himself described as an obstacle in his own family's destruction. 1 week, Ronan said. Not a concession, a deadline. After that, I start calling the notes on your other properties. Not your mother's, yours, your car, your line of credit, your wife's business account. A pause. "I trust that's motivating." Preston said nothing. I heard Ronan's shoes on the hardwood, the even unhurried steps of a man leaving on his own terms, and then the front door opened and closed, and the SUV engine turned over outside, and then it was quiet again. I stayed where I was. Preston stood in the living room for a long moment. I could hear his breathing from where I stood, fast, shallow, the breathing of a man recalculating in real time. Then he pulled out his phone and called. It rang twice. Then Camille's voice, sharp and taut. "Well?" she said. "I need more time," Preston said. "1 more week." "You said that last week." Camille's voice had a blade in it. "Preston, my sister's wedding is in December. Do you understand what it's going to look like if we show up without—" "I know what it's going to look like," Preston snapped, and the control he had maintained for days cracked open for just a second before he clamped it back down. "I'm handling it, Camille." "Handle it faster," she said. "Get the old man out of the house. He's been here 3 days and nothing has moved." "He's harmless," Preston said, and the certainty in his voice would have been offensive if it hadn't been so tactically useful to me. "He doesn't understand the documents. He doesn't understand any of it." "Then stop letting him take your mother to appointments," Camille said sharply. "I don't care if it looks bad. She should be signing documents, not sitting in waiting rooms." "I can't stop him from—" Preston stopped himself. A beat of silence. Then his voice dropped lower, and something about the shift made me go very still. "Actually, once the amendment goes through, it won't matter, because everything is under Reed's name anyway. If anyone comes asking questions after the fact, it all points to Reed. I made sure of that." A sound came from further down the hall. I turned my head. Reed was standing at the top of the staircase. He had come down in socked feet, and I hadn't heard him. He was gripping the banister with one hand, his face the color of chalk. His other hand pressed flat against the wall, as if he needed it to stay upright. His eyes were locked on the living room doorway, where Preston's voice was still coming through, low and self-satisfied, and completely unaware that his brother was standing 8 feet above him, hearing every word. I watched Reed's face go through something I will never forget for as long as I live. A look I had seen once before when he was 9 years old and understood his father had believed Preston over him. The same face. 29 years later. On a staircase. At the hands of the same person. The last story. The one where Preston was ruthless but not monstrous. The one where this was hard but not evil. The one where his brother was using him but would not destroy him. That story died on the staircase landing in real time, and I watched it go. Reed's jaw tightened until a muscle jumped in his cheek. His eyes went bright and wet and furious all at once. He looked down at me from the stairs, this son of mine shaking with the effort of not making a sound, and I could see in his face the exact moment he made his decision. He held up one finger, then he turned and went back up the stairs on silent feet. 1 minute later, my phone buzzed in my pocket. A text from Reed's number. It said, "My room, now, I have something for you." I took the stairs 2 at a time. Reed's door was closed. I knocked twice, heard the latch turn, and stepped inside. The room was dim, curtains drawn, bed unmade, the particular disorder of a man who had not been sleeping properly for weeks. Reed was standing by the window with his back to me, one hand pressed flat against the glass, staring out at the side yard. His shoulders were still shaking, but more controlled now, the trembling of a man who had moved past the initial shock and into the cold, clear territory that comes after. He heard me close the door and turned around. His eyes were red and swollen, his face carrying the raw, stripped look of someone who had just had something fundamental removed from them. Not a loss exactly, but the destruction of a story they had needed to survive. He crossed to the nightstand, opened the bottom drawer, and reached underneath a folded sweatshirt. He placed a small USB drive on the mattress between us. It was in a clear Ziploc bag, sealed, the kind of careful preservation that doesn't happen accidentally. "How long have you had that?" I asked. 3 weeks, Reed said. His voice was hoarse. "The night I found the email draft, the one about my name being on everything, I didn't sleep. I just sat at the desk until 4 in the morning, making copies of everything I could access on Preston's shared drive. The contracts, the emails, the listing agreements, the draft trust amendments." He pressed the back of his hand against his mouth for a second. I told myself it was just insurance, that I was being paranoid. He let out a short, broken laugh that had no humor in it at all. Turns out I wasn't paranoid enough. I picked up the bag and held it in both hands. "Reed," I said carefully, "I need to know exactly what's on this. All of it." He sat down on the edge of the bed like his legs had simply decided they were done. He bent forward, elbows on his knees, and started talking. "There's an email chain between Preston and the Aldridge and Voss law firm going back 8 months, he said. 8 months, Dad. He started planning this before Mom even got sick. Before she started declining, before the medication, he was already mapping out the trust modification, already identifying which assets to liquidate first." His voice cracked on the word liquidate like it was something he couldn't fully make himself say out loud. The land on Pacific Avenue was first on the list. He had a developer contact already lined up, a company called Meridian Group. They had a letter of intent ready. My jaw tightened until I could feel it in my temples. "There's also a file," Reed continued, "a folder labeled M-Prep. I didn't understand what it meant at first." He stopped and rubbed both hands over his face hard like he was trying to scrub something off. "It's a draft obituary, Dad, for Mom. It was written in past tense, like she was already gone." The room felt like it dropped 10 degrees. "He wrote an obituary," I said. "A draft," Reed said, and his voice broke completely on the second word, splitting open in a way that made him press his fist against his sternum like he was trying to hold himself together from the outside. "It had a date range. It said she passed after a brief illness, and the date it was written was 6 weeks ago." His eyes were streaming now, not quietly, but in the full, ugly way of someone who has been holding back a flood for too long. "She was still gardening 6 weeks ago, Dad. She showed me a tomato she grew. She was so proud of that stupid tomato, and he couldn't finish the sentence. I crossed the room and sat down beside him on the edge of the bed, and I put both arms around my son, this 38-year-old man who had been carrying the weight of his older brother's cruelty since he was 9 years old, and I held on. Reed broke down completely. His whole body shook with it, deep and wrenching, the kind of crying that doesn't have anything graceful about it. Shoulders, heaving breath, coming in jagged pulls, years of accumulated injustice and grief and self-recrimination pouring out all at once. I felt his hands grip the back of my jacket like a kid who had finally found solid ground after a very long time in the water. "I should have stopped it sooner," he choked out. "I knew something was wrong. I knew the first time he asked me to sign a document I hadn't read. I knew. And I told myself it was fine because I needed the money and because he was my brother and because I thought..." A shuddering breath. "I thought family meant something to him, even just a little." It does mean something to him, I said. Just not what it should. He pulled back after a moment, wiping his face with the back of his arm, and looked at me with eyes that were devastated, but also for the first time since I had arrived, something like clear. Dad, he said, his voice still raw, I need you to know I didn't know about the medication. I swear on everything. I thought Mom's decline was real. I thought she was getting old and getting sick, and that was just what was happening. His jaw worked. If I had known he was doing that to her deliberately, I would have called you myself, the first day. I believe you, I said, and I did. He nodded, wiping his eyes again. Then he straightened up and took a long, steadying breath, the particular breath of a man deciding to stop falling and start standing. There's a voicemail recording. Preston keeps a digital backup of all his calls. I found the app on the shared account. There's a message he recorded himself, his own voice doing an impression of Mom. He was practicing her voice. There are 3 takes of it. I sat very still. Was there a sent version? I asked. Did he actually send it to anyone? Reed opened his mouth, then closed it. There's one outgoing file, he said quietly. Sent to your number, about 3 years ago. 3 years ago, I remembered a voicemail I had received, a short message, Vivian's voice quiet and tired, saying only that she needed space and that she hoped I was well. I had listened to it 4 times. I had decided it was the kindest goodbye she knew how to give. I had never called back. Okay, I said after a moment. My voice came out very flat. Okay. The blood in my veins went cold and still. 4 years of silence. 11 letters unanswered. The story I had built about Vivian choosing distance, choosing not to respond, choosing to let us end without a word. How much of that silence had been manufactured in Preston's voice? Reed, I said, and I was surprised by how steady my voice came out because the inside of my chest felt like a building coming down floor by floor. I'm going to take this drive to a lawyer today, a good one. And what happens next is going to be very hard for this family. I looked at him directly. But I need you to understand you are not going down for this, not alone, not the way he planned. Reed looked at me, and something in his face that had been locked tight for years, some last defensive bracing, finally carefully came undone. What do I need to do? He asked. Right now, I stood up and put the USB in my jacket pocket. Go downstairs, have breakfast, act like nothing has changed. I looked at him one more time. And Reed, the next time Preston asks you to sign anything, you call me first, no matter what time it is. He nodded. His hands were still trembling slightly, but his eyes were dry now and his jaw was set. As I turned to go, he said, Dad. I stopped. I'm sorry, he said, for all of it. So am I said. Let's make it right. Preston left the house at 11:30. I was in the kitchen when I heard him tell Dolores he had a meeting downtown and would be back by 4. I heard the front door close, heard his car back out of the driveway, and counted to 30 before I set down my coffee mug. Dolores was already standing in the kitchen doorway watching me with that particular expression of hers, the one that meant she had been waiting for this moment and had already decided what to do with it. There's something you need to see, she said, in her study. Vivian's study was at the end of the back hallway, a small room she had claimed as her own 15 years ago, lined with bookshelves and smelling of the cedar sachets she kept in every drawer. I had not set foot in it since before the divorce. Standing in the doorway now felt like stepping into a room that had been sealed and preserved every object exactly where she had left it, the particular stillness of a space that held its breath. Dolores crossed to the desk, Vivian's old roll-top dark walnut, the one she had inherited from her mother, and pulled open the bottom left drawer. I found these 3 weeks ago when I was looking for the insurance card, she said. I haven't touched them since. Inside the drawer, held together with a rubber band that had gone brittle with age, was a stack of envelopes. I crossed the room and picked them up. My own handwriting looked back at me from the front of every one. 11 envelopes, all addressed to Vivian Hargrove at this address. All with my return address in the corner, the apartment on Sycamore, the one I had moved into the week the divorce was finalized. The stamps were canceled. The envelopes had been opened. I could see the careful slit along the top of each one, the kind made with a letter opener, not torn in haste, and then resealed with a thin line of clear tape along the flap. Someone had read every single letter I had written to my wife, and then put them back in their envelopes and buried them in a drawer she might never open. Preston had a key to this house. He had always had a key. Vivian had given it to him years ago for emergencies, the way mothers do. He stopped by often enough and alone often enough that intercepting the mail would not have required anything more than arriving before she did. My hands were shaking. I set the stack on the desk before I could crush them. She never saw these, I said, and my voice came out rougher than I intended, scraped down to something raw. I don't believe she did, Dolores said quietly. The tape on the seals, she would have noticed that. She notices everything. She paused. Or she would have said something to me. In 16 years, she has never kept a secret from me that she didn't eventually tell. I stood at that desk and looked at those 11 envelopes and felt the last 4 years rearrange themselves into a shape I had not been prepared for. I had written the first letter 3 weeks after the divorce. I had been sitting at my kitchen table at 2 in the morning, unable to sleep, the apartment so quiet it had a sound of its own, and I had picked up a pen and written 4 pages by hand because I had run out of other ways to carry what I was feeling. I had told her I was sorry. I had told her that I understood if she needed the silence. I had told her that the ring was still on my finger, and I didn't know if that was pathetic or honest or both. She had never read it. None of them had reached her. I opened the bottom right drawer next on instinct, the one Vivian always used for things she wanted to keep close but not display. And there, beneath a small journal and a folded piece of graph paper, was a ring box. I already knew what was inside before I opened it. Her wedding band, white gold simple, the one I had put on her finger in a church in Savannah on a June afternoon in 1983 when neither of us had any money and both of us had more hope than sense. She had worn it for 37 years. She had taken it off when the divorce was finalized. But she had not thrown it away. She had kept it in a ring box in her desk drawer, 4 feet from where she sat every morning. Something split open in my chest, not cleanly, not with any warning, just a sudden and total giving way like a dam that had held for so long it had forgotten what it was holding back. My eyes burned so fiercely I had to press 2 fingers hard against the bridge of my nose and breathe through my mouth, slow and deliberate, while the room swam at the edges. Dolores put her hand on my arm and didn't say anything because there was nothing to say that the room wasn't already saying. When I had it back under control mostly, I unfolded the piece of graph paper. It was the floor plan. Hand-drawn pencil on graph paper, the lines slightly uneven, but the layout unmistakable. A rectangular space divided into a small kitchen, a serving counter, a seating area with 8 tables, and a window seat along the east wall. In the upper right corner, in Vivian's handwriting, Pacific Avenue corner someday. She had kept it. Through the divorce, through 4 years of whatever Preston had been feeding her about me, through however many months of medication, fog, and confusion and manipulation, she had kept the floor plan of the diner we were going to build together when we were old and slow and finally had enough time. I sat down in her chair. Behind me, Dolores said gently, "There's one more thing. In the journal." I opened the small journal. Most of the pages were empty. Vivian had never been a dedicated writer, more of an occasional one, the kind who wrote when something needed to go somewhere. The last entry was dated 14 months ago, before the medication had started, before the confusion had set in. The handwriting was clear and even and unmistakably hers. I was going to call him today. I had his number in my hand. Preston told me last spring that Eldon had signed everything without hesitation, that he hadn't asked for anything, hadn't tried to contest anything, hadn't even asked how I was. Preston said he'd moved on, that it was better this way. I didn't know if I believed it, but I didn't call. I didn't know how to call someone who might have stopped caring and find out that they had. So I put the phone down. I kept the ring. I kept the plan. And I told myself that someday, if I was wrong about all of it, I would find out. But today wasn't that day. My throat closed completely. I read it twice. Then I folded it back into the journal and held it in both hands and sat in Vivian's chair in Vivian's study and thought about a woman who had kept a ring and a floor plan and a journal entry about almost calling me in a house where her own son had been intercepting her mail and practicing her voice on a recording device. "Dolores," I said when I could speak again. "Yes. I need to take the journal and the floor plan." I stood up. "The letters I'm going to leave. If this goes to court, they need to stay exactly where they are." "I understand," she said. I tucked the journal and the folded graph paper into my jacket pocket next to the USB drive Reed had given me that morning. I stood in the middle of that quiet room for one more moment, surrounded by the smell of cedar and old books, and the particular aching presence of a person I had been grieving without knowing I was allowed to. Then I looked at Dolores. "We're getting her out of this house," I said. "Not in a week, not in a few days." Dolores straightened. Her chin came up. "Tomorrow," I said. I had 3 hours to work with before Preston came home at 4. I spent the first hour on the phone Whitfield to confirm the asset freeze motion was ready. Dr. Merritt to arrange for Vivian to be received at the Piedmont Recovery Center under a private admission, Cecily Barrow, to let her know what was happening and ask her to come in early the next morning. Each call was short, precise, and made from the back corner of the yard where the maple tree blocked the sightline from the house windows. By the time Preston's car pulled back into the driveway at 4:15, I was sitting in the kitchen reading a 2-week-old newspaper, and if he looked at my face and saw anything other than a bored old man waiting for dinner, he was sharper than I had given him credit for. He was not that sharp. "Good afternoon," he said, setting his keys on the counter with the particular deliberateness of a man reasserting ownership of a space. "How was your day?" "Quiet," I said. "I took a walk, read a little, checked on your mother." "How was she?" "Tired," I said, but she knew what day it was, and she asked me if the garden was still alive. I told her the tomatoes had given up, but the rosemary was hanging on. Preston smiled, the reflex, not the real thing. "Good, that's good." He loosened his collar and poured himself a glass of water. "Actually, Dad, there's something I need to tell you about tomorrow." I set the newspaper down with the careful pace of a man who had nowhere to be. "Of course," I said. "What's up?" "I've moved up the timeline on the trust paperwork," he said, and his voice had that practiced casualness that I now recognized as the sound of a lie wearing business clothes. "The attorney is coming by at 9 tomorrow morning just to walk Mom through everything, get the signatures sorted, clean and simple." He met my eyes with the full warmth of his performance face. "I'd love for you to be there. Family united, you know." The clock on the microwave read 4:22. Ronan Sykes had given him 18 days. Preston was burning through them. "Wouldn't miss it," I said warmly. That night I waited. Preston stayed up until nearly midnight. I could see the light under his door, hear the low murmur of calls, the keyboard clicking. Camille probably, maybe the law firm, maybe Ronan. The sounds of a man tightening every bolt on a machine he was terrified of losing control of. At 12:15, the light under his door went dark. I waited another 20 minutes. Then I got up, walked down the hall in socked feet, and stopped outside Vivian's door. I had not been inside her room alone since I arrived. There had always been a reason not to Preston nearby, the hour too late, the moment not right. But tonight I lifted my hand and knocked very softly 3 times. A pause, then her voice low and clear, "Come in." The room was lit by the small lamp on the bedside table, and in its warm circle, Vivian was sitting up against the headboard with a book open in her lap that she clearly had not been reading. She was wearing a white cardigan over her nightgown, her silver hair loose around her shoulders, and she looked, despite everything, despite the weeks of wrong medication and the fear and the weight of what her son had been doing, she looked like herself. More herself than I had seen her since I arrived. The adjusted medication was already working. She looked at me when I came in, and her face did something complicated, relief and wariness, and something older and deeper. Underneath both of those, the look of a woman who had been wanting something for a long time and had taught herself not to want it, and was now failing at that lesson. I pulled the chair from the corner and sat beside the bed. "Preston moved up the signing," I said quietly. "The attorney is coming at 9. Vivian closed her book and set it aside. "I know," she said. "I heard him on the phone this afternoon through the wall. My hearing is better than he thinks." Her mouth curved slightly at the corner, not quite a smile, but the ghost of one. "Most things about me are better than he thinks." "I know," I said. "Vivian, tomorrow morning I'm going to ask you to come with me, same as the other day. Doctor's appointment, that's what we'll say." I leaned forward, elbows on my knees. "But we're not coming back here. Not yet. I have a place arranged safe private with medical staff. Your medication will be properly managed. No one will have access to you who you haven't approved." She took that in without flinching. Her hands folded in her lap tightened against each other for just a moment. "And the paperwork?" she asked. "Whitfield is filing a motion to freeze all trust assets at 7 tomorrow morning, before the attorney arrives, before Preston can execute anything." I held her gaze. "It's over, Vivian. He doesn't get to finish this." She exhaled long and slow, like a breath she had been holding for weeks. Her eyes went bright for a moment, dangerously bright, and she pressed her lips together hard and looked up at the ceiling until she had it back. "I want to ask you something," she said when she trusted her voice again. "Anything. Did you find the letters?" Her voice was careful, precise. The voice of a woman asking a question she already knew part of the answer to. My chest tightened. "Yes," I said. "This afternoon, in your desk." "I never received them," she said. "I want you to know that. I looked for letters. For months after the divorce, every time the mail came, I looked. Her jaw was working now, the muscle in her cheek jumping. "Preston told me you hadn't written. He said you signed everything and drove away and that was it. That it was clean for you, easy." Her voice thinned on the word easy, like it was something that had cost her to say. I wanted to believe he was wrong, but he was so certain, and I was so... She stopped, pressing her fingers against her mouth for a second. "I was so ashamed of how much I still wanted to hear from you. It felt easier to believe you'd moved on than to keep waiting for something that wasn't coming." Every word landed like something dropped from a height. "I wrote 11 letters, I said. My voice was steady only because I was holding it there with both hands. The first one was 3 weeks after the divorce. I told you I was sorry. I told you the ring was still on my finger." I turned my hand over and showed her the engraving, facing up now, her name in the gold. It never came off. Vivienne looked at the ring for a long moment. Her eyes filled completely, and this time she didn't fight it. 2 tears tracked down her face in the lamplight, and she reached up and pressed her fingers against her cheek, as if she could hold the rest of them back by force. "Eldon," she said, her voice cracking down the middle on my name. "He did this to us. Our own son did this to us." "Yes," I said. "He did." 4 years, she whispered, and the whisper was the most devastated sound I had heard in a very long time. 4 years we both thought... She stopped, drew a breath that shook on the way in. "I have been so angry at you, for so long, for something you never actually did." "I know," I said, "and I was so careful not to push, so careful to respect your silence. I told myself that was love." I leaned forward slightly. "I was wrong about that too. Love doesn't go quiet and call it respect." She reached out then, her hand crossing the small space between the bed and the chair, and wrapped her fingers around mine. Her grip was warm and immediate and fierce, the grip of someone who had made a decision. "Tomorrow," she said, "I'll be ready at 7. 7. I confirmed. I stood, and for a moment I just looked at her. This woman I had loved for 41 years, sitting up in her lamplight with her eyes still bright and her jaw still set and her hand still holding mine. "Get some sleep. Eldon." She stopped me at the door. "Whatever comes next, I want you to know that I never stopped. Not for a single day." I stood with my hand on the doorframe and felt those words go all the way through me. "Neither did I said. I went back to the guest room, set my phone alarm for 5:30, and lay on top of the covers, fully dressed, staring at the ceiling. Somewhere down the hall, Preston's light stayed dark. He thought tomorrow morning was his. He had no idea it was mine. My alarm went off at 5:30, but I had already been awake for 40 minutes. I dressed in the dark, moved through the guest room by memory, and was in the kitchen with the coffee running before 6. The house was still and gray in the early morning, that particular quality of silence that exists in the hour before a household wakes, fragile, breakable, already carrying the weight of what was coming. I had 4 things in my jacket pocket. The USB drive from Reed, the folded floor plan from Vivienne's desk, her journal, and a slip of paper with the address of the Piedmont Recovery Center written in Whitfield's handwriting. At 6:50, my phone buzzed. Whitfield motion filed last night at 11:40 via emergency electronic submission. Elder abuse documentation qualifies for after-hours filing under Georgia court rules. Clerk of Judge Harlan's court confirmed receipt at 6:20 this morning. Temporary restraining order on all trust asset transactions is in effect pending judicial review. Preston will receive formal notice within the hour. I read it twice. Then I put the phone face down on the counter and poured myself a cup of coffee and stood at the kitchen window watching the backyard go from gray to gold in the early light. The Japanese maple caught the first real sun at 7:03. At 7:08 I heard footsteps on the stairs. Not Vivienne's, too heavy, too fast. Preston. He came into the kitchen already dressed, already wired the tie perfectly, knotted the jacket on. His eyes went to me first, then to the coffee pot, then back to me with an expression that was working very hard to stay neutral. "You're up early," he said. "Couldn't sleep," I said pleasantly. "Coffee's fresh." He poured a mug and leaned against the counter, and I could see the calculation running behind his eyes, the rapid, reflexive assessment of a man who has been managing people his entire life, checking every variable, measuring every face for information. "Big day," he said. "Is it?" I said. He smiled, and this time the smile had an edge underneath it that he wasn't quite hiding. "The attorney comes at 9. Should be straightforward. An hour, maybe 2. He wrapped both hands around the mug. "I'm glad you're here for it, Dad. Really. It means a lot that the family is..." The sound of wheels on hardwood interrupted him. Vivian appeared in the kitchen doorway. She was dressed. Not in a nightgown, not in the soft, defeated clothing of a woman being managed. She was wearing a navy blue blouse and dark trousers, her silver hair pinned back cleanly, a small leather overnight bag on the floor beside her feet. She was standing straight, both hands on the doorframe, and her eyes were clear and sharp and absolutely deliberate. She looked in that moment exactly like herself. Preston's coffee mug stopped halfway to his mouth. "Mom," he said, and the warmth in his voice had a new ingredient now, something taut and watchful underneath it. "You're up. Are you feeling okay?" "I feel better than I have in weeks," Vivian said, and the steadiness in her voice made something in my chest lift. "Eldon is taking me to a follow-up appointment this morning." Preston set his mug down. "I didn't know about a follow-up. I can come." "It's just routine," I said. "You've got the attorney at 9. No sense in everyone shuffling around. We'll be back." I paused just long enough. Later, something shifted in Preston's face. Not the polished performance that had slipped just slightly like a mask that has been worn too long and the heat beginning to soften at the edges. His eyes moved from me to Vivian to the overnight bag on the floor, and I watched the calculation accelerate behind his eyes as he tried to decide how alarmed to be. "That's a lot for a routine appointment," he said, nodding toward the bag. His voice was still controlled, but there was a wire in it now, a vibration just under the surface. "I'm keeping a change of clothes there," Vivian said evenly. "I'm tired of being unprepared." Dolores appeared from the back hallway at that exact moment, carrying a second small bag, Vivian's medications properly labeled and sorted, which she had packed the night before. Cecily Barrow came through the side door 30 seconds later, her own bag over her shoulder, as if she had simply arrived for her regular shift. Preston looked at all three of them. I watched the exact moment he understood. His jaw tightened. A muscle jumped below his left ear. His hand on the counter pressed flat, and the knuckles whitened by degrees like a man squeezing something he couldn't actually hold on to. The performance, everything he had built over 42 years, the management, the warmth, the careful architecture of a man in control held for one suspended second. Then he turned to me, and for the first time since I had walked through that front door, he dropped it entirely. "Dad," he said, and his voice was low and stripped and nothing like the son who had greeted me at the door 4 nights ago. "What are you doing?" "Taking your mother to her appointment," I said. My voice was quiet, steady. The voice of a man who had already made every decision that needed to be made. "That's all." "Don't!" The word came out sharp, almost involuntary. He caught himself, glanced at Vivian, at Dolores, at Cecily, then back at me. "Don't do this. You don't understand what's been put in place here. The legal structure, the care arrangement. If you disrupt this now, you could create enormous—" "Preston!" Vivian's voice cut across his like a blade through paper. He stopped. She stepped fully into the kitchen, leaving the doorframe behind, and walked to stand directly in front of her oldest son. She was 68 years old, and she had spent weeks being deliberately diminished, and she stood in front of him now with her chin lifted and her eyes clear, and something in her bearing that I recognized from 41 years of knowing her, the particular quality of Vivian Hargrove when she had reached the absolute end of something. "I know about the trust amendment," she said. Her voice did not shake. "I know about the power of attorney. I know about the listing on Pacific Avenue." She watched his face go through 3 different colors. "And I know about the medication." Preston opened his mouth. "Don't," she said quietly. "Whatever you're about to say, don't." His mouth closed. "I am your mother," she said, and her voice finally cracked on the last word just slightly, but she kept going straight through it. "I loved you before you knew what love was. I paid your debts when I should have let you learn from them. I made excuses for you when other people could see clearly what I refused to see." Her eyes were bright and wet and furious all at once. "And you looked at all of that and decided I was a resource." Preston's face had gone the color of old ash. His mouth was working, but nothing was coming out. And for the first time in his life, possibly the first time in his life, Preston Hargrove had nothing to say. "I'm leaving now," Vivian said, "with Eldon. And when I come back, it will be on my own terms." She turned away from him, picked up her bag, and walked to the door. I followed. As I passed Preston, I stopped for just a moment. Not to gloat, I had never been that kind of man, but because there was something I needed him to hear from me directly, without performance, without strategy. "I'm not doing this to punish you," I said quietly so only he could hear. I'm doing it because your mother deserves someone who chooses her. I should have been that person a long time ago. Then I walked out the front door into the October morning and held it open for Vivian. She stepped out of that house without looking back. In the driveway, Reed was standing by my car. He had come down without being asked, still in his sweatshirt from the night before, his eyes red-rimmed and his face carrying the open, undefended look of a man who had already grieved the thing he was losing and was ready for whatever came next. He held the car door open for his mother. Vivian stopped when she saw him. She put her hand on the side of his face just for a moment, just her palm against his cheek, and said, "I know, baby. I know." Reed's face crumpled. He pressed his hand over hers and held it there for one shaking breath, then two. Then he straightened up and stepped back and let us go. I started the engine. In the rearview mirror, Preston stood on the front porch. His phone was already in his hand. 2 weeks is not a long time, but when someone has spent months deliberately dimming the lights inside your own mind, 2 weeks of proper sleep and correct medication can feel like surfacing from something very deep. I watched it happen in real time. By day 5, Vivian was sitting up and reading the newspaper front to back. By day 8, she had asked Cecily for a notepad and spent 2 hours writing from memory every document Preston had placed in front of her over the past 3 months, with dates, approximate contents, and whether she believed she had signed anything. 12 items, both sides of the page, single-spaced. Whitfield read it and went very quiet in the way of a man whose number keeps getting larger. On the 14th day, Vivian dressed in navy blue and we drove to Piedmont Avenue. She walked into Whitfield's conference room under her own power, sat down without assistance, and folded her hands on the table with the composed energy of a woman who had been waiting for this room for a long time. Dr. Sabine Merritt was already seated to the left medical file and signed competency affidavit in front of her formal certification that Vivian Hargrove was fully capable of making legal and financial decisions without supervision. "Mrs. Hargrove," Whitfield began, "before we start, you understand everything before you today, and you're here of your own free will." Vivian looked at him with an expression somewhere between gratitude and impatience. "Whitfield," she said, "I have been waiting for this day for longer than you know. Please don't make me wait any longer." He allowed himself a small smile. "Then let's begin." The first document, revocation of the healthcare power of Attorney Preston, had maneuvered her into signing. Vivian read every line with the careful precision of a woman who had managed a household budget for 30 years and knew exactly what fine print looked like. Then she signed her name in one clean, unhesitating stroke. Her hand did not shake. Something in my chest released quietly the way ice loosens in early spring. "Next," she said. The second document was the trust amendment revocation, the one with the liquidation clause, the co-trustee designation, Reed's name on every line of liability. When Vivian reached the subsection granting Preston authority to sell assets at his discretion, her jaw tightened and Whitfield stopped speaking mid-sentence. "He had this drafted 8 months ago," she said. "Not a question." "Based on the USB records," Whitfield said carefully. "The planning began 8 to 9 months prior to today." Vivian set the document down and pressed 2 fingers between her eyebrows. When her eyes opened, they were fierce and completely dry. 8 months, she said. "I was making him dinner, calling him every Sunday. I bought him a birthday gift." She picked the pen back up. "And he was in a law office having this written." She signed it without another word. The third document, a new irrevocable clause protecting the Pacific Avenue property from sale, transfer, or encumbrance by any party for any reason during Vivian's lifetime. When Whitfield finished reading it aloud, Vivian looked up at me. "I kept the plan," she said. Just that. 2 words, and Whitfield didn't need to know what they meant. "I know," I said. Something moved across her face, not quite a smile, not quite a tear. She turned back to Whitfield. "Add a note to the file," she said. "That property stays, whatever happens." "Noted," Whitfield said. And he meant it. She signed. Then Whitfield placed one final document on the table. "This pertains to the original trust established in 2019, he said. "Specifically, the 15% beneficiary designation for Eldon maintained at your explicit request after the divorce." Vivian looked at the document, then at me. "You know about it." "Whitfield told me," I said, "a few weeks ago." Her chin lifted. "And I don't want it," I said. "I asked Whitfield to redirect it into a care trust." Independent trustee court oversight, no family access without formal approval. So what happened these past months can never happen again. Vivian stared at me the way a woman stares when she has been lied to too many times and has learned to look carefully before she believes anything. Then something in her face broke open gently like a door finally opened with the right key.
"You gave up everything in the divorce," she said, her voice dropping. "Preston told me you just wanted out, that you didn't care." Her voice thinned to something barely held together. I believed him. God help me, I believed him. "I gave it up because I thought I owed you," I said. "I thought the least I could do was make sure you were taken care of." I leaned forward. "I was wrong about why, but I was never wrong about wanting you to be okay." Vivienne pressed her lips together until the color left them. Her eyes filled completely, and this time she let it happen. 2 tears, then 3 in the quiet of that room while Whitfield studied his notepad and Dr. Sabine looked at the window, giving her the privacy of not being watched. "He read me your note," I said quietly. "From the trust file, 2019. "Good." She wiped her face once, fast and decisive. "Then you know I meant it." She straightened, turned back to Whitfield, and fixed him with a look that made him sit up slightly. "Set up the care trust, make it ironclad." A pause. "And put my name on it as the protected party, not as a dependent. I am not helpless. I am protected. There is a difference." "Understood," Whitfield said and wrote it down. At 3:15, his assistant knocked. "Mr. Crane, Preston Hargrove has called 3 times. He's asking about the asset freeze." Whitfield looked at her over his glasses. "Tell him the matter is before the court. All inquiries go to the filing documents." He paused. "If he calls a 4th time, let it go to voicemail." Vivian watched this with her hands folded and her chin level, and on her face was something I had not seen in a very long time. A woman feeling the full weight of something stolen finally settling back into place. On the drive back, she put her hand over mine on the gear shift. "Thank you," she said, "for not giving up, even when I gave you every reason to think I had." I turned my hand over and held hers. "You never gave me a reason," I said. "Someone else did. That's not the same thing." 3 days after Vivian signed the revocations, my phone rang at 8:40 in the morning. "Mr. Hargrove, my name is Sandra Oates. I work with the investigative firm retained by Whitfield Crane." Her voice was professional, clipped the voice of someone used to delivering information that hits hard. "I've been asked to brief you before the Whitfield's office will be forwarding the full investigative findings to the DA this afternoon as part of the formal complaint filing." "Go ahead," I said and picked up a pen. She went ahead for 22 minutes. By the time she finished, both sides of my notepad were full, and the picture she had drawn was worse than anything I had assembled on my own. Preston Hargrove had not become this in the past year. The financial forensics went all the way back to 2018, $47,000 quietly redirected from the family trust into a shell LLC that existed only on paper with one name listed as its registered agent. Reed Hargrove. Reed had not known the LLC existed. Preston had created it, funded it with family money, put his brother's name on the paperwork, and used it to cover his first debt to Ronan Sykes. When the LLC was eventually flagged by the trust's bank, the paper trail led directly and only to Reed. Preston's fingerprints were not on a single document. 6 years. He had been practicing this for 6 years. I called Whitfield immediately. "You spoke to Sandra?" he said, picking up on the first ring. 6 years, Whitfield?" I said, and my voice came out raw. "At minimum," he said. "The LLC establishes a pattern going back well before the trust modification scheme. Combined with Dr. Merritt's medical affidavit, the USB files, Dolores's documentation, and the Zillow listing timestamps, Preston's attorney is going to have a very difficult conversation with him today." "What charges?" "Financial elder abuse under OCGA 30-5 felony classification in Georgia, fraud in the inducement, possible forgery if the handwriting analysis confirms Vivian's signatures were obtained under impairment." He paused. "And identity fraud for the LLC creating a financial entity in Reed's name without his knowledge is a separate criminal matter entirely. The State Medical Board has also received a separate referral regarding Dr. Raymond Foss's prescription practices. That's a parallel process, not our case to run, but it's in motion. And Reed," my grip on the phone tightened, "cooperating fully. His testimony is critical. Criminal prosecution is unlikely given his cooperation and the evidence that he was himself a victim." Whitfield's voice steadied. "He loses the co-trustee designation, civil liability on some documents, but he won't go to prison, Eldon."
I exhaled for what felt like the first time all morning. The Care Trust, I asked. Fully established yesterday, Judge Harlan approved expedited processing given the documented elder abuse context. When there's an active felony referral attached, the court moves faster than standard timelines. Independent corporate trustee, First Covenant Trust Services, no family connections. Court oversight on any disbursement above $5,000. Vivian is completely protected financially and legally. A beat. She is safe. And the Zillow listing on Dunmore Street was pulled the morning the restraining order was served. Pacific Avenue 2. Both properties are frozen under the trust injunction. Nothing moves without a court order. I set the pen down and sat with that for a long moment. That afternoon, my phone rang again, the number Preston had used the night I stood in the hallway and heard him call me harmless. But the voice that came through was Camille's. She sounded nothing like the woman I had heard through that wall. Her voice was thin, scraped down, carrying the exhaustion of someone who had been crying until they simply ran out. "Mr. Hargrove," she said. "I don't know if I should be calling." "You're calling," I said, "so say what you came to say." I knew about the trust strategy. I knew about the legal structure. Her voice cracked. I pushed him. I won't pretend otherwise. I told myself whatever was happening with Vivian's health was just aging, decline. I didn't ask questions I didn't want answered. I know what that makes me. Her voice dropped. I didn't give the order, but I didn't stop it either. And I don't know anymore if that's a meaningful difference. I swear to God, I didn't know he was doing that to her. "Camille," I said, "I'm telling you the truth," she said, urgent now. "Whatever you think of me, I am telling you the truth about that." I thought about it honestly, about how much a person can miss when they are only looking in the direction they want things to go. I had done that too once. "I believe you didn't know about the medication," I said carefully. "Everything else, that's for other people to sort out now." A pause. "How are your children?" A long silence, then barely audible, "Scared." "They have a mother," I said. "Make sure they know that." She exhaled long and ragged, and then the line went quiet. That evening I drove to the recovery center. Vivienne was in the common room looking out at the garden. Her teacup between her hands, her color better than I had seen it in months. She told me Cecily had brought a crossword that morning. She had finished it in 40 minutes. She told me Reed had called and they had talked for an hour, not about legal matters, just talked the way they hadn't talked in years. Small things, true things. A life slowly, carefully coming back to itself. Then her expression shifted. "Preston called today," she said. "From his attorney's office, he asked me not to cooperate with the investigation." Her jaw tightened. "He said a family should handle its own problems." Something cold moved through me. "What did you say?" Vivian set her teacup down with a small, decisive click. "I told him," she said, her voice absolutely level, "that a family that handles its problems is one where the people in it are honest with each other, and that he had spent 42 years making sure that was never true in ours." Her eyes met mine. And then I hung up. I looked at this woman, 68 years old, 3 weeks out of a fog that had been deliberately built around her, sitting with her chin level and her eyes clear and her crossword finished on the table. It felt like love. It had always felt like love. It had just been waiting for the interference to be cleared away. On the 14th of November 2024, Preston Hargrove was formally contacted by the Fulton County District Attorney's Office regarding pending felony charges under the Georgia Elder Abuse Act. Whitfield called to tell us. Vivian reached over, squeezed my hand once, hard, deliberate, then let go and picked up her crossword. We moved in on a Thursday in December, 2 cars, 4 boxes, and nothing else we needed to bring. Not the house on Dunmore Street. Vivian was not ready for that, and I did not push. Some spaces need time before you can stand in them without flinching. Whitfield's assistant had found us a small craftsman cottage 40 minutes south of the city, close enough to the water that you could hear it on quiet nights, far enough from everything else that the quiet had room to breathe. Vivienne stood in the middle of the living room that first afternoon and turned slowly, taking in the low ceilings, the oak floors, and then she stopped. Her eyes had landed on the window seat along the east wall. She made a sound that was half laugh and half something she had to press her fingers over her mouth to contain. "What?" I asked. She looked at me with her eyes bright and swimming. "The floor plan," she whispered. "Eldon, I drew the window seat on the east wall." I looked at the window seat, then back at her. Neither of us had planned it. It was just a rental found by a paralegal who knew nothing about graph paper and old dreams. But there it was, the east wall. the morning light already moving across the floor in exactly the direction it would need to go for a small place that served good coffee and had nowhere particular to be. Vivienne laughed, then a real laugh, full and sudden, the laugh I had not heard in 4 years, and it hit me somewhere so deep and undefended that my eyes burned and I had to look at the ceiling and breathe through it. "Take it as a very good sign," she said. The first morning I woke before she did and made coffee. I had done this for 34 years, risen first, ground the beans, had her cup ready before she came downstairs. It was not a grand gesture. It was just the smallest, most consistent thing I knew how to do for her. I set her cup by the window and sat across from it with mine and waited. She came down 10 minutes later in her blue cardigan, hair, loose wool socks on her feet. She saw the cup and stopped walking. She stood at the doorframe with her hand pressed against the wood and her eyes on the coffee, and her face doing something I did not have a word for: grief and gratitude and the ache of someone receiving something they had stopped believing would ever come back. Then she crossed the room, sat down, and wrapped both hands around the mug. "You still take it black," she said. "Always have," I said. She smiled, not the careful surviving smile of the past weeks, the real one, the one that reached all the way up and stayed. That afternoon, Dolores arrived with a box of Vivienne's things from Dunmore Street. Books, photographs, cedar sachets, and at the very bottom, wrapped in a dish towel, the ring box. Vivienne opened it at the kitchen table. When she saw the white gold band against the velvet, she pressed her lips together hard and breathed through her nose for a long moment. Then she placed the ring on the table between us. Not on her finger, not handed to me, just there in the space between our two cups where we could both see it. "I'm not ready to make it official again," she said, her voice honest and unashamed. "But I'm not putting it back in the drawer. I want to see it every morning. I want to know it's still true, even if the paperwork catches up later." I looked down at my own hand, the ring I had worn for 34 years and never removed, the engraving I had turned inward for 4 years of a silence I had not chosen. I turned it outward, her name in the gold facing the light, the way it was always supposed to. Vivienne's breath caught. Her eyes filled, and this time she let the tears fall without stopping them. Just let them go the way you release things that have been held too tightly for too long. "I'm glad you came back," she said. "I never really left," I said. That evening, Reed called. He had found an apartment nearby, was restructuring his debt, had started seeing a therapist. His voice carried something it had not carried in years, tentative but present, like a man relearning how to trust solid ground. "How's Mom?" he asked. Vivienne was in the window seat with her crossword wool socks pulled up, coffee going cold the way it always did because she never remembered to drink it while it was hot. "She finished the crossword in 38 minutes, I said. "She's insufferably pleased about it." From the window seat without looking up. "I heard that." Reed laughed, bright and real and sudden. I had not heard that laugh in so long it did something to my chest I was not prepared for. "Tell her I love her," he said. "Tell her yourself," I said. "Sunday." After I hung up, I refilled both our cups and sat back down across from Vivienne in the lamplight. "Don't ever go quiet on me again," she said without looking up from her crossword. I looked at this woman who had kept a ring, a floor plan, and a journal entry about almost calling me across 4 years of silence that was never hers to give, and felt something settle into place so permanently that I knew I never would. "Deal," I said. She smiled, picked up her pencil, and went back to her crossword. And I sat across from her and drank my coffee, and the water moved outside, and the ring on my finger faced the light, the way it should have faced it all along. I am 70 years old. I have made more mistakes than I can count, and the most expensive one was believing that silence was the same thing as peace. This family story cost us 4 years, 4 years of manufactured, distant, stolen letters, and a love that nearly died, not because it was broken, but because someone decided it was more useful as a wound. If there is one thing I want you to take from this family story, it is this. The people who love you do not always have the loudest voices in the room. Sometimes they are the ones who kept writing letters you never received. Sometimes they are the ones who kept the ring. I believe God puts certain people in our lives not to make things easy, but to make sure we find our way back when we have gone too far in the wrong direction. For me, that person was a 62-year-old housekeeper who made a promise to a dying woman and kept it. Do not be like me. Do not call your silence respect. Do not call your distance dignity. If you love someone, say it. Show it. Fight for it before someone else decides for you that it is over. This family betrayal did not begin with greed. It began with a family that stopped talking honestly to each other. That is the part that should frighten us most because family betrayal rarely announces itself. It grows in the quiet. Every family story has a version of this. I hope yours ends better than mine almost did. If this story reached something in you, leave a comment, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe so you never miss the stories that matter. Your presence here means more than you know. Thank you for staying until the very end. And one small note before we continue: some of the stories on this channel contain fictional elements constructed for educational and reflective purposes. If that is not the content you are looking for, we completely respect that. Please feel free to explore other channels that better suit your needs. But if you choose to stay, we will always make it worth your time.